Hi, fellow tea lovers. Settle in, because we've got a story. I'm Nell.
And I'm Rose, and today we're bringing you the tea.
Across eras. So in 1930, the person I'm going to talk about was a 16-year-old high school graduate. She was called an unusually pretty girl, fair of skin, with friendly blue eyes and golden curly hair. Her friends called her as clever as she was attractive, and she was very fierce when she was up against a bad guy, showing herself to be, quote, frequently outspoken and authoritative, end quote, and a bit judgmental about people's appearances.
As teenagers will be.
Yes. But given the 1930s of it all, there was also some racism. There are many black characters in the books, and they're either like a mammy stereotype, which is somebody who's like the loving housekeeper / cook who practically raised you kind of thing, or unintelligent, or sometimes just like really mean and hateful people.
We were talking about this the other day where you have these books that you have really fond childhood memories of, and then it's kind of like going back and meeting your heroes. You know,
Yes.
you go back and read them as an adult, and mine was Half Magic, which was this really cute fantasy story where these kids find a coin that grants them wishes, but only half what they've asked for. And I remember recommending it to the guys. I have such fond memories of it, and I go back to read it as an adult, and the very first chapter has some just insane Middle Eastern stereotypes, and there's what is going on here? It's always a sad ride.
Yes. So here's a quote from an essay I read by Andrea Ruggiero. She interrupts a burglary in process and is thrown into a closet and left to starve by one of the thieves. Eventually, she is freed by the bungalow's caretaker, Jeff Tucker. Jeff Tucker is an African-American man, and in the book, in the 30s, he's portrayed as childlike, speaking in a dialect and easily fooled. Yeah, not great. There are also suspicious people, and they're always referred to with these phrases like things we don't use anymore, especially for when we're talking about people who don't maybe live in the USA. And some of these were always insinuating backgrounds from, the Middle East, the greater Asia area, the nomadic peoples of Europe, or even Jewish people.
It's the other.
Yeah.
If you're looking for an antagonist and you're not being particularly creative, the other is something that got reached for a lot.
Always. So in 1953, her age was updated to 18 without explanation. And over time, her hair changed colors from golden to strawberry blonde to Titian, which is a word that looks a lot like Titan, but it means like a reddish brown-orange color. Where'd that come from?
Yeah, inspired by the Italian Renaissance artist Titian, did beautiful depictions of Venice and Venetians, and it's part of why we know how rich his time period in Venice was.
Nice.
Beautiful art.
Awesome. Here's another quote from the same essay. She's also a WASP, which WASP stands for White Anglo Saxon Protestant, I believe?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, a stereotypical, like, rich mom in an 80s movie is what I think of.
Yes.
Yeah. So, despite her traditionally feminine attributes, such as good looks, a variety of clothes for all social occasions, and an awareness of good housekeeping, she is often praised for her seemingly masculine traits. She operates best independently, and she had the freedom and money to do as she pleases.
I think that's interesting that as long as you're really towing the line as far as your feminine values, you can feel free to grab a couple of like hobby male values.
Yeah.
Just as long as you're curating your bedrock correctly, then sure, get a little crazy with it.
And she's so great because I don't know if you remember, whenever she was out on an adventure, she really just had to like call home. And sometimes
just check in with the folks.
Yeah. I did find it interesting. As her age went from 16 to 18, most of the time she's 18, she never had any overt pressure to get married.
And that's interesting, because that's supposed to be your job.
Yep. She had friends who, were in universities who were women. Yeah. In 1959, many of the racial stereotypes in her life were, I guess, dealt with by eliminating all the non-white characters. Nope, everyone's white now.
They try and do the rewrite, and, on some level, I guess that's an acknowledgement of maybe do better, but that's not the solution.
No.
We're just not going to deal with the problem at all. And
yeah.
Oh, that happens.
We're going to call it the 1959.
We're just going to scrap everything. We don't feel like being nuanced.
In 1986, she becomes a bit more mature And instead of sticking with her regular love interest, who is never called her boyfriend, she starts having romances with other people, and like it's usually involved in like this crazy mystery she's solving. You know, they're going to have murders as the 80s come around. In 1995, also, when she goes to college, she breaks up again with her regular love interest, and during this time, she becomes more like respectful of her male authority figures, whereas previously she was like happy to tell off a cop that she thought wasn't doing a good job.
What, now you're on the market, you gotta be a little bit more marketable? That's correct.
I guess. Also, in the time she was in college, like, it was more like a soap opera, and she seemed a little less intelligent, unfortunately. In 2003, she got a hybrid car and a cell phone, of course. And recently, she has appeared in movies and TV shows of all sorts of imaginings. Yes, I'm talking about the world-famous girl detective Nancy Drew. Did you ever want a secret passageway in your house?
So much. I mean, I blame the Babysitter's Club at least equally with that wand, but
Yes.
I wanted a secret door so badly.
I wanted desperately to find something secret. I went around and knocked on everyone's walls in everyone's house always.
Every time. There was a little bit of the parquet floor in our rental when we lived in California that lifted up a bit, and I was like, oh, this is the perfect stash spot for the nothing that I have to hide. So I would like write cryptic notes and hide them under there, and I just always wondered if anybody ever found them.
That's amazing. I love that. So all of the Nancy Drew books, they're written by Carolyn Keene. But I think I know, Carolyn Keene's not a real person.
Right. The books became their own genre.
Definitely, they really did.
Authors.
I tried to find out where they picked Carolyn Keene from. I could not find anything. I assume they drew it out of a hat.
Super interested if anybody knows the answer to that.
Definitely. So the original-ish Nancy Drew books were written by more than 25 different authors. And thinking about all of this got me thinking about ghostwriters, ghosts who write.
Nancy Drew, there's ghosts involved.
Yeah. But not in the like ghostwriter of celebrity memoir kind of way, but like in these serial novels.
Because that's different. Like when
It
you're
is.
ghostwriting as a singular author, especially if you're doing like a biography, you're working with that person directly. Like,
Exactly.
You're working as their biographer. But these ones, it's like the Star Wars novelizations.
Yeah.
I always thought it was really interesting. The woman that wrote Dealing with Dragons, Patricia Reedy, formative author for me, still go back and read it all the time. She actually wrote a couple of those. Quite more than a couple, I think. And that was always so interesting to me because it was so different than her actual books.
There were some young adult authors that I like to follow and read all their stuff, and a couple of them did that also. Yeah. Recently, speaking of memoir ghostwriters, I read Britney Spears' memoir, and then I also read Jessica Simpson's memoir.
It's an interesting pairing.
Yeah, and I don't know why. Nothing against Jessica Simpson. I love the memoir. I didn't know a single song she sang. Maybe I knew one at that time, but after I listened to the book, I went back and like looked up some of the songs and albums she referenced. Nothing.
Yeah.
So, whoever their ghostwriters or ghostwriting team was, I thought their voices came through very much the way I see them. I mean, I do not know these people at all.
It's always based on the public persona.
Yeah, but I was like, wow, this seems like something exactly like what Britney Spears is going through. So the writers did a good job. But this type of ghostwriting, it's also called ghostwriters, but it's when there's a pen name or someone sells their name, and there's multiple writers writing Nancy Drew books under the name Carolyn Keene. And so I was like, how did that become a thing? So the Nancy Drew books were one of like the first of a kind. They came through a place called the Stratmeyer Syndicate, and they were the first book packager to have their books aimed at children. And so a book packager is not a publishing house, but it's usually hired by the publisher to put the book together. And it can be anything from writing to printing. So this company was formed in 1899, and it was very successful. They produced books that were entertaining to kids, but even allowed the kids to feel a little bit grown up because they were aimed at kids, with kids as the main characters. So the founder of this company was Edward Stratmeyer, And he thought, like, this feeling the kids are getting, I can definitely harness that for profit. Monetize.
Ow, my eyes, the dollar symbols.
And his company produced books in, like, this assembly line, super efficient style. They were written and printed in a way to just maximize profit. So he did publish books under his own name, but he quickly realized whenever his book had a pseudonym, it sold better. So he wrote about 42 novels in an 18-month period, but that was when he realized he could get more books by having more authors to write, and then he could deal with multiple publishing houses.
Yeah, no, have a collective so you can produce more product. I mean, people do that with content now online all the time.
Yeah. So in the early 1900s, he started hiring ghostwriters, and his company is the ones that produced Bobbsey Twins, Tom Swift, Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys, and then my all-time favorite, which is something so few people know about, the Dana Girls series, also written under the name Carolyn Keene.
Really? I've never heard of that.
I love those. They're set in the 70s.
Interesting.
They're like cool, hip girls.
I was going to ask you if Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew came first.
Hardy Boys. I think their first book was published in 1927, and then Nancy Drew's first book was 1930.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's pretty close, actually.
Yeah, it really was. They were incredibly successful at this. They had like a list of guidelines that all of these books coming from his packaging house were supposed to follow. And these are quotes. I lifted them off Wikipedia, who summarized them nicely. So all the books should be part of a series. And then to establish more quickly if a series was likely to be successful, the first several volumes were published at once. And the volumes were all called readers.
Because you're scattering some seed and seeing if it grows. Well, that's a gross way of putting it, but accurate.
Yeah, because while I find that hilarious, Netflix gave us 4 episodes of Bridgerton and then 4 more. And then with Amazon, they've got The Boys right now, and you get the first 3 episodes at once.
Yeah, no, they do the exact same thing. That's hilarious.
So, continuing the guidelines, the books had to be written under a pseudonym. It would provide the continuity of authorship, but, only for the readers.
Right.
Yeah.
It's part of the stage for the story.
Yeah.
Is the author name.
Yeah. And if the author was like someone's real name was a pen name, then if they died, then they still would use their name.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The books would look as much like contemporary adult books as possible, with similar bindings and similar typefaces.
This makes you feel grown up.
Yeah. All of the books had to be a predictable length. Chapters and pages should end mid-situation to increase the reader's desire to keep reading.
Okay, now that
Every book. Each book would begin with a quick recap of all the previous books in the series in order to promote those books. Did you read Nancy Drew?
I did, but honestly, it's been a very long time.
So it would be like, Nancy was itching for another case as she recalled how she had solved the stolen jewels that were recovered in her last mystery. And then it would say the full title, which even as a kid I thought was weird, like, The Mystery of the Tolling Bells or whatever.
And was that at the same time when they started doing the order form in the back of the books? They're always, especially in the Scholastic books, there was an order form for the next one in the series.
Yep.
You could mail them a check and they would mail you the book.
Yeah.
I miss mail order books quite a bit.
Yeah.
Not Amazon, but subscription series. That was
you
fun.
can pre-order things now, but you don't really get series like this anymore.
Yeah.
The books might even end with a preview of what was to come. So here's a quote. Nancy could not help but wonder when she might encounter as strange a mystery as the recent one. Such a case was to confront her soon, the clue of the whistling bagpipes.
Foreshadowing with a sledgehammer.
100%. So originally, and I don't know exactly for how long, but the books would be priced 50 cents because 75 cents, $1, and $1.25 were much more common.
Oh, interesting. So I'm only halfway interested, but it's a steal of a deal. I'll pick it up.
Yeah, it's 75 cents for a kid's book. Perfect.
Yes.
Remember when kids' books used to be cheaper than adult books?
Yeah.
That's not a thing.
That. I have this, my very first memory in a bookstore, my dad said I could spend $10, and I thought I had to add up the U.S. and Canadian prices.
Oh, man.
And so I came with my couple of books, okay, I found my $10, and then he explained that I actually had twice as much money. It was like Christmas. I'm like,
That's
what?
amazing. Yeah. So also, the final big rule was that the characters couldn't age or marry. And this is because in their earlier series, Tom Swift, the Rover Boys, and Ruth Fielding, when those characters grew up and got married, sales dropped.
Oh, yeah. Well, because that's not why you went there for the story.
No. In the 1950s, Stratmeyer's daughter Harriet had taken over the company, and she began updating many of the most popular series. She removed many racial stereotypes and slurs, as well as outdated words like roadster. I had a hard time finding if it was Harriet's idea to remove all of these things, or if it was the publishing house.
Probably.
Yeah. The publishing house had started receiving complaints from parents about some of the problematic attitudes, and so she agreed with a lot of it. I don't know if she personally agreed with it or just agreed with the pressure.
Yeah.
She went through, and like I mentioned earlier, when they just took out every character who wasn't white and made them white, that was her. That was how she dealt with it.
That's not dealing with it. That's just shoving the problem under a rug.
In the 1970s, Nancy Drew went paperback because, I know, the hardback market was dwindling.
Yeah, well, hardbacks have always been a hard sell. They last longer, mostly.
Yeah. So, these books, when they first came out, despite their huge popularity, libraries and some bookstores did not want to carry them. Yeah, I read this article by Dale Andrews called The Hardy Boys Mysteries, and basically it stated that libraries refused to carry the books from this place because for decades they were called, quote, trash.
Yeah, it's considered lesser literature. I've heard that argument a lot. I actually avoided a really fun series for a long time because I kind of considered it. We used to, when I was working in bookstores, we used to call them the RPG novels, and it was the ones that were based off of the game. And It was, if you enjoyed the game and you just wanted to be immersed in the world for a little bit longer, it was a fun ride, but it was not considered serious.
Yeah.
And so, and I had this same series recommended to me over and over and over and over again that I considered to be in that genre, which really just judging that in the first place was dumb because I did miss out on some fun stuff.
Yeah, happens a lot.
Oh my gosh, yes. But then I enjoyed the hell out of the series. I'm sitting here waiting for new installments as we speak.
So, serialized books were considered to cause mental laziness and to induce a fatal sluggishness.
And kids are reading the stupid shit.
Right.
Literally every generation has said that, by the way, if anybody's
Yes.
in any question.
Do you remember when it was like comic books were definitely not literature ever, but then when graphic novels started coming out, there were a lot of people like, also not literature.
No, that's just a comic book. That's just stupid. Like, well, actually, they're telling some pretty complex stories here. Not that comic books aren't. They're just doing it in a different way. But all of it was serious in its own way. But it just gets lumped together as like, well, that's that crap.
I grew up devouring every single Archie comic book I could get my hands on, and I still read them when I see them, which is not often anymore. Both of my nieces love them.
Yeah, I never got into those, but I was obsessed with ElfQuest.
Okay.
Which is funny that I don't really like manga now because it's definitely, it's American, but it's squarely in the kind of manga graphic novel category. And yeah, well, I was obsessed with fantasy everything. So
yeah.
It's just like very inappropriate for a 10-year-old sometimes, but so good.
So there's an author, Nancy Tillman Romalov, and she has written some about these kind of books. Here's a direct quote. Series books were considered to ruin a child's chances for gaining an appreciation of good literature, which was subsequently shown by one study not to be the case, and to undermine respect for authority. Much of the contempt for social conventions is due to reading this poisonous sort of fiction.
Oh, I'm sorry to tell you, lady, much of the contempt for social conventions is the definition of being a young human.
Right. The first thing that came to mind when I read that was when gangster rap was becoming a thing, and it was like, they're being arrested, you gotta shut them down, you know.
This is clearly just
the
killing
kids
society.
are dying.
That's the first stop of somebody that's irritated with anything that's going on. So won't someone please think of the children?
Yep. And then continuing on, same quote from Nancy Tillman. Franklin K. Matthews, who was the chief librarian for the Boy Scouts of America at one time, wrote that series books were a method, according to the title of one of his articles, for, quote, blowing out the boys' brains, end quote. And
Good Lord.
I know. And psychologist G. Stanley Hall articulated what was then like one of the most common concerns. And he said serious books would ruin girls in particular by giving them false views of life, which will cloud her life with discontent in the future.
She's gonna know what she's missing, damn it. We need to squash this.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, got two very reasonably educated people right here that both grew up on serial novels, so suck it, those guys.
There's also, I mean, they were just very old school.
Of course.
Yeah. And none of this hurt sales.
Of course.
Stradmeyer was completely unperturbed, even when his books were banned in 1901, so this is early,
Yeah.
from the Newark Public Library. He was like, personally, it doesn't matter much to me. Taking them out of the library has more than tripled my sales.
And that's still true. Book burners, they're still buying them. Nobody gives a crap.
Yeah. Yeah. And so even more than 100 years later, the attitude did not change anything. It didn't hinder anything. Serialized books grew and grew and grew in popularity. So in like maybe 4th or 5th grade, I don't remember, I was reading the Sweet Valley High books.
Oh my gosh, Sweet Valley High. I used to have the subscription, and my entire
I'm so
block,
jealous.
it was such a coup to get my mom in on that deal. My entire block, 3 or 4 girls, they would always just somehow know when the box had arrived, and they'd be like, I want to borrow the next Sweet Valley High. I need to figure out what it has. Well, it's mine, so I'm reading it first, but I need to read it like lightning because there's a bunch of people in line behind me. And then, of course, the next person, like the second person that gets it is always just criminally slow, and everybody's coming to you for it. It was such a thing. It was like a neighborhood event.
So I brought over one of my Sweet Valley High books. Okay, this is a more modern one. This is book number 96. And guess how much it cost?
$2.75.
I mean, that's pretty good. It was $5.99.
Dang, I was way back.
This one was published in 93. So, the Sweet Valley books, if you don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if you don't know, it's about 2 identical twin sisters, Jessica and Elizabeth. They're gorgeous, they're blonde, they're upper middle class.
They're paying attention to their feminine bedrock, so they're allowed to have some masculine traits.
Yep. So, these books were incredibly popular. They had so many spin-off series. There was Sweet Valley Kids, Sweet Valley Junior High, Sweet Valley University. Those were weird. The Unicorn Club, which was like when they were in 7th grade, and Sweet Valley Junior High was 6th grade. In 7th grade, the Unicorn Club was that like secret society middle school club that Jessica belonged to.
Oh
with
my gosh, I forgot.
Lila.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
My memories of the storyline in actuality are very thin.
Yeah, I mean, I remember all of this because I've been researching it. They also had these standalone books. Do you remember, like, there were, like, the scary standalone ones. There was, like, a couple supernaturals. There was, like, ones that were written from, like, a side or, like, a lesser, not the main character's point of view.
Yes.
Like Enid's story.
Yes, that was actually, I don't know if that was formulaic, on purpose to the same level as what you were talking about, is all these series have to have, this specific type of character and a specific type of situation. All of those series had the supernatural thing happened, and the side story character decides to, they decide to flesh them out a little bit.
Yeah.
It was like a parallel set of requirements.
My favorite were, I don't know if they're the legacies or the sagas. That was the family history. And, there was always a ton of twins, and they would be named like Jessamine and Elspeth,
Right. So it's close,
right?
It's family tradition.
I love those. But so all of these books are by Francine Pascal. However, I knew that unlike Carolyn King, she was a real person, but she didn't write all these books. They were coming out at a pace of about once a month at their highest point. So I started looking her up, and she had, by the time she started these, she already had success with writing. Like, she had some other books. She wrote a Broadway, I think. She'd pitched some TV shows. And so when she had the idea for, like, this Sweet Valley universe, like the twins thing, she didn't want to write it. And so she pitched it, like, why isn't there, like, a teen version of Dallas? And they were like, nobody's going to watch that.
That is exactly it.
Yeah.
It is just the soap opera formula.
Right. And they were like, nobody's going to watch that. She was ahead of her time in that, because how many TV shows do we know? Speaking of Archie comics, they turned Riverdale into, a TV show. I despised it, but that's because I read Archie comics.
If you like the original source material, you almost never like what they turn it into. It just is.
Yeah.
You have to treat them as separate entities.
Yeah. So, Francine wrote what she called the Sweet Valley Bible, and it was basically like every character, like major plot points, character backgrounds, and she had a team of ghostwriters that she oversaw. And the writers, they were often like young writers and new writers, and she would give them fairly detailed outlines of the plot points. And then, they're serialized novels, so you're getting a book every month. So, of course, right now, I'm like, of course she didn't even write all of them. Obviously. I don't know what I thought as a teen. I guess I didn't think.
It's not something that really crosses your mind. Like, her thing is done. Now I can enjoy it.
She said that she would tell the writers they couldn't add in anything of their own. They had to follow, like, all the backstory and stuff. But they had a little leeway in that they could get from one of her plot points to another kind of on their own, a little creatively. Probably not very creative.
Probably not very. It's sort of like every director has different feelings about ad-libbing lines.
Yep. These books, like we just said, soap opera. I was trying to remember some of the themes. The one I'm holding in my hand is where Elizabeth, the good twin, not that Jessica's bad, she's just more spicy. But Elizabeth has been arrested because she may or may not have been driving in a drunk driving incident on prom that killed someone. And that someone it killed was Jessica's date. So in retaliation, this is just in like the first 2 sentences of the blurb on the back of the book. Jessica has finally stolen Elizabeth's boyfriend Todd. I'm pretty sure that happened multiple times.
It was a continuing theme.
Yeah. There was one book about, like, a fat girl who lost weight and people liked her. Good old 1980s values. I love that. There was a book, I can't remember her name, and I could be wrong, but I think she used ASL and maybe she was deaf, or maybe just hearing impaired, I don't remember. But she tries cocaine at a party and, like, drops dead. Because, I mean, that was, like, in 1980 or 81, I think, when that book came out. So, yeah, the very, like, 1980s Wolves of Wall Street cocaine-doing references come to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see where they put that in there. There was, like, personality swaps, a lot of comas. Lots of comas.
Solid soap opera writing has to have a good coma.
Cheating on tests, cheating on boyfriends, multiple proms, birthdays, and Christmases, even though they were always 16, up until randomly in 1998 when they finally were allowed to turn 17.
Yeah, by petition only.
And that has to do actually with the arc that happened in this book I hold in my hand. The arc is really confusing. It starts at prom and ends 6 books later at Christmas.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's the evil twin.
Oh.
Yeah. There's another book where the evil twin, she wasn't a twin, she was just an evil person who happened to look exactly like the twins.
Because that happens. Absolutely.
Yeah, she gets killed off. But there's a book that comes out later, one of those supersized editions, where it turns out she had a twin. And the twin found out, and now she's coming after our twins.
Yes! This is Young and the Restless, it is.
Right. So these books were super popular. 181 Sweet Valley High books were published between 1983 and 1998. That doesn't even include all the spin-offs. So then, Francine. If you're listening to this, I just need to know what the deal was. So, in 2011, this book comes out called Sweet Valley Confidential, and I see it in Target, and I'm like, oh, is this like how everything is a graphic novel now? And, like the Babysitter Club. Graphic novel, Babysitter Club,
Yay, my childhood's getting a reboot.
Whatever gets people to read is fine. So, I buy it. It's set 10 years after the high school books ended, and the internet says it was written by Francine herself. It's the biggest piece of garbage I have ever read.
Oh, no.
I think Francine lost the Sweet Valley Bible that she wrote and didn't bother to reread the books for notes.
Oh, that's
There
upsetting.
were characters with the wrong names, wrong backgrounds, wrong parents, wrong physical attributes in some cases.
What?
The book opens up with, like, Elizabeth, I think she's remembering crying during sex.
Whoa.
Yeah, although maybe it was because her husband, aka longtime school sweetheart, Todd, they'd been married, but he'd been cheating on her for the past 5 years with Jessica.
Oh, what? No, that was supposed to be a will they won't they storyline, not a my sister stole my husband's storyline. Ooh.
Right? Random characters are gay. I'm pretty sure the F word
Insulting.
makes an appearance in it.
What?
I know.
Well, clearly, were those still marketed to teenagers? I mean, obviously, like, teenagers say...
I don't know what it was marketed to because I don't remember the section it was in Target, but I did look up because I remembered it was bad. It has a 2.5-star rating on Goodreads. That's
you can't
bad.
be the only one. I mean, we all had a deep love for this. I guess you can't really moralize it when it was classified as trashy books in the first place, but trashy has a big asterisk attached. Like,
yeah.
Trashy can be elevated trashy, can be fun trashy.
It was fan fiction, for sure.
Yeah.
It was like, she was like, what if all these things that didn't happen are going to happen? The book should have never been written. I mean, I don't know. I assume it was a cash grab. It was so bad. Over time, anyways, getting off that soapbox, I've given away so many of my books. You know, I go through things where I've got like 600 books in my house and then I moved. Back before I bought a house.
I basically have walls of books, so I feel you.
Yeah, and so I go through things where I'll be like, okay, you can get rid of the Sweet Valley High books. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I had my own library, if I had like the Beast Mansion from Beauty and the Beast with my own library, I would have kept them.
When we get unicorn money someday. Unicorn money, by the way, is a very specific term, which means when you get the kind of money that you, instead of driving to work, ride your unicorn. That is unicorn money. So most of my Sweet Valley High books got given away. I kept 8 of them, and it was from this arc, the Evil Twin arc. The nostalgia.
Yeah. I wish I had kept the family histories, but I didn't. Although, honestly, I feel like if I reread it, it would be one of those things where I'm all, oh, that wasn't great.
Yeah, when things age badly, sometimes it's better to just kind of leave the veil up.
Yeah. Whenever I rewatch Dazed and Confused, because like every 10 years I do, because I forget.
Wow, every 10 years? Like every couple of months. I love that movie.
Okay, for me, I'm all, I watched it in high school, and I was just like, oh, no.
I always associate that one with Knight's Tale because I saw them for the first time on the same weekend.
Oh.
They're not really related. But
no.
In a way, they kind of are, because you got to step into them for entertainment, not reality.
Exactly. Exactly. And when I was in elementary school, I really enjoyed the Babysitter Club books.
Oh my gosh, yes.
The Babysitter Club TV show that came out in 2020 is excellent.
I have not seen it.
I know. I tried to talk you into watching it, but it was deep pandemic. And you were like, I just watched Tiger King, and I'm just not feeling anything that happy right now. Makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So the Babysitter Club books, they came out in 86, and they were pitched to the author, a real person, Anne M. Martin, by an editor at Scholastic. Remember Scholastic Book Fairs?
Scholastic has such a particular smell. You walk into an area with too many Scholastic books and you're 10 again.
Yeah.
You just are.
I loved Scholastic Book Fairs, but what I loved even more were the little 4-page newspaper material booklets that your teacher handed out once a month or something, and you could order literally all the books your parents would pay for.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And I didn't realize it at the time. I was really lucky. I got books on every single order except one, which I clearly, completely, and totally still remember. We'll talk about that in a minute.
I think that's probably the best thing my parents ever did for me was never, ever stifled access to books. I mean, and having money makes it easier, obviously.
And my parents didn't either, except one time. So it was when Home Alone came out. So I think that was in 1990, like Christmas. My friend Stacy called and she was like, hey, we're going to see the Home Alone movie. Do you want to come with us? Like, can you go? And I was like, that sounds fun. So I asked my mom, I'm like, Stacy's stepdad is taking them to see Home Alone. Can I go? And they lived on a street that ran perpendicular to us, and you could see their house from our house. So I go with them, and the dad drops us off at the movies, and I knew my mom was going to be furious.
You are in public without parental supervision.
Yeah. Oh. Yep. So I think I was 9. No, if it was Christmas time, I was 10. So when I got home, my mom was like, are you out of your mind? And I was like, whatever. And my punishment was I was grounded for a week, which meant no phone, which back then, that wasn't too bad. But I couldn't play with my friends outside because right where those two streets met was where everyone played. But the worst was I couldn't order the book I wanted from the Scholastic order.
Oh, that's offsides. That just hurts.
It was a Fear Street book. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I remember the cover was like lime green, and the girl was like opening a door and a skeleton hand was coming out.
That could describe a lot of them.
As soon as I had my own money, I bought that for myself from the bookstore. So, back to the Babysitter Club books, those were supposed to be a 10-book series, but the first 10 weren't super popular, and I'm so confused by this. Scholastic was like, we're going to order 100 more. But then, by the time the 11th book came out, the first printing was up to 100,000 copies.
Somebody had their head on straight there, like to give it a little bit of lead time to gain popularity.
Yeah.
I mean, Princess Bride.
Oh, yeah.
The Princess Bride did not do well at first and is now a key part of many of our hearts.
Yep. So by the time Babysitter Club books stopped being published in 2000, there were 213 of the books and spin-offs written.
Wow. I definitely didn't read them all.
Me neither. And then the author, Anne M. Martin, said she wrote between 60 and 80 of them. These books also had a standard for writing. It was different than like the early 1900s. Each of these books was going to be told from a different character's point of view.
All right.
So, like Claudia's cool telephone book, number 2, I don't remember.
Oh, I was so jealous of Claudia for a lot of reasons.
Same. Oh, she was so cool. But, that is from Claudia's point of view. Yeah. So chapter 1 would introduce the character and the beginnings of the plot. Chapter 2 was going to introduce the actual babysitting club that they had, its members and how it worked, and then the primary character's family. And then the remaining chapters would be plot, usually a subplot, and always conclusions.
Sweet and simple.
Mm-hmm. And this team of ghostwriters had their own nickname. It was the League of Extraordinary Ghostwriters. So while some of these ghostwriters wrote more than others, each of the ghostwriting team had their own tone and style of writing, and that worked out pretty well with the way the characters changed point of view in each book.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't like, one of them only wrote about Claudia, and one of them only wrote about Dawn, and one of them only wrote about Christy.
They all had the versatility to be each of those characters. That's cool.
So all of these series I've mentioned, they have been updated and re-released, trying to modernize them. They have been made into graphic novels, TV shows. They've been made into movies. Maybe some of them, maybe all of them.
Kind of loved the Fear Street movies that came out semi-recently that I didn't expect to, because Fear Street, that's near and dear. But I actually thought that was quite well done.
My literal next sentence says, no, this is amazing. We're so in sync. And while we didn't dig in deep to the 3 Fear Street books, the Fear Street movies that came out during the pandemic were 10 out of 10.
Really?
They were just I know horror movies are interchangeably called scary movies. I don't typically find horror movies scary. I listen to too many true crime podcasts to find something fake scary.
No, real life is terrifying. This is fun.
Yeah, nobody needs to be possessed by a demon to be terrible.
Yeah.
We just sometimes are. But they came out and they were just so good and entertaining. And I remember that was when you could still have a personal bubble, and we would wait for them every Friday or whenever.
Yeah, no, it
so
was such
fun.
an event for a couple of weeks, and just, there were a heck of a lot of event things happening to us at that point.
Exactly.
That was just so
And by the
fun.
time we got to the last one, and we're oh, that makes sense now. Because each movie goes back in time.
The whole room just kind of standing up and, all 4 of us, standing up and going, oh my, yes, that's amazing, that's what happened. That's such a great experience.
It was good. Those were really good. Every Halloween, I look for movies like that and just rewatch those. And so, Fear Street books were written by R.L. Stine. Speaking of him, he also wrote Goosebumps.
There's several Goosebumps within view as we speak.
Absolutely. And he actually had a big falling out with Scholastic over his supposed ghostwriters.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
Scholastic was your contract says you can't use ghostwriters. And his team was no, that was only there to prevent plagiarism. I don't know exactly what it said. I wasn't that interested in finding out, because he was putting out at some points a minimum of 2 books a month.
You have to have
one Fear Street and one Goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would be well, we have this, I do have a team of people and they make outlines for me, but I write them. And I don't know, come on.
Well, maybe he's just
To
that good.
whatever extent he says he didn't have ghostwriters. And I don't know, because it's not like they were hard. but physically sitting down and typing something is hard.
Absolutely. Just setting up a structure, even if it's a simple storyline, I mean, that's work.
And the Fear Street and Goosebumps series were perfect in that the characters were different nearly every time.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't really have to worry about like character continuity. So I also brought over some of my Nancy Drew books. So I brought over The Hidden Staircase, which is book number 2, and this edition is from 1930. And then I brought over this one, same book, Nancy Drew Mysteries, The Hidden Staircase. And this inside cover has scenes from different books in it. And so I would always be like, read this one.
Mm-hmm.
This belonged to my mom. See her name right there?
Oh.
And this one was published in 1959. The books are so different.
Just the structure of it is so different.
Here's the beginning of chapter 1 for you. I gave...
I was talking about the cover.
Yes, she was.
She's talking about what's in between them.
But all of it's so different. So this is the book from 1930. I'm going to read you the first paragraph. Chapter 1. A Rude Visitor. I declare I don't know what makes me so nervous this afternoon. I have the strangest feeling, as though something were just about to happen. That's the first line.
And then this one, Chapter 1, The Haunted House. Now, this is the same book, yes?
Yep.
Chapter 1, The Haunted House. Nancy Drew began peeling off her garden gloves as she ran up the porch steps and into the hall to answer the ringing telephone. She picked it up and said, "Hello."
Yeah,
so she's doing work. She's answering her own phone.
Yeah, or being super intuitive.
That's so wild.
And then, as time moves on, we get like the Nancy Drew, I don't know, they're the Nancy Drew mystery stories, but so are these other ones. These ones are paperback. I mean, this one's called The Flying Saucer Mystery. Let's see when this one was published. Because we had 1930, 1959, 1980. Okay.
You know what's so interesting about that cover is that I had hand-me-down copies from my brothers of the Dungeons & Dragons serialized books, some of which were Choose Your Own Adventure, which were amazing if you never experienced them. But the cover is almost exactly like that. It's so cool. It's marketed the same way.
The same artist.
Mm.
Here I have, this is from the Nancy Drew Files. When the Nancy Drew Files books that I have did not look like this, I'm assuming this is Nancy's friend on the cover. It's not Nancy Drew.
It could really be like bus station poster for a soap opera.
Right. It's called Betrayed by Love. And this one was published, and this is like very, very much mass market paperback. And this one came out in 96. Yeah. So what was your favorite serialized book series to read growing up?
It's got to be Goosebumps.
Okay.
That was the one that was kind of similar, with the same group of friends that I shared books with. Like the minute anybody got a new Goosebumps, it made the rounds. It was like we were all into it for different reasons, but it was one of the few things that like everyone I knew about it, and you could have those conversations. So
I loved reading the Goosebumps. My brother would get them, and I would always read them after he was done. I maybe my overall favorite in terms of just like how much I generally enjoyed reading it when I did, is probably Sweet Valley.
To be honest, it's up there. It wasn't the first, but it was like that and Goosebumps were the pair for the longest time.
Yeah. And I have always loved Nancy Drew so much. I do love even more than Nancy Drew, the one I mentioned at the top, the Dana Girls. There were like two cool sisters in the 70s at a boarding school solving mysteries. Those are really hard to find. Mm-hmm. Whenever I go out of town, I will stop at all the like thrift and antique stores and see what Dana Girls and Nancy Drews they have.
Oh, I love going to used bookstores in a place you're not familiar with. It's just, you can always see little snippets of people's houses and lives, and then you find the one that you've been looking for 10 years.
What was the most unhinged it now, or how you felt about it then, serialized books did you read?
Probably the Fear Street histories. I loved them to distraction. I mean, I'd pick up anything that had history in it, which is shocker. But the witch trial element and rolled up with mystery, and then kind of like knowing the storyline a little bit of the modern Fear Street books, and then having that kind of... it's really fun to feel like you have the inside information and you understand that story, and it just ticked every box. But they were just unhinged in terms of actual writing. It was Fair Street. It was the same quality of writing, which was not bad, and the same level of excitement and anticipation, which those put together. I mean, it was beautiful and fun, even though it was ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember those. Mine was Animorphs. Okay, we have to cut that noise out. Hang on, I need to look up the ending because I forget parts of it because I had to block it out of my mind.
Yeah, I was a children's librarian probably when they were getting their paperback run. Okay. And I remember seeing the covers like, well, that's just weird.
Where the kids were morphing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Animorph series, if you don't know, this is not a spoiler. The books came out in 1996. So there's these 5, like, young teen, preteen, I don't know, I can't remember.
Tween.
Yeah, friends.
I hate that word, but it is accurate.
And they have this ability, thanks to an alien race that's invading Earth, to transform into any animal they can touch. So
nice.
they're the Animorphs.
Oh, okay, so they don't have to pick one animal. I never knew that.
Well, Tobias does. He, at one point, turns into, Tobias gets trapped, I think from the beginning of the book, in a red-tailed hawk.
Oh, interesting. So it's not always voluntary.
Yeah, he's the only one that happens to. Maybe there's a time limit, I really can't remember. But he, over the series, his, what he eats changes. He goes from, like, eating animal food to, like, his friends being a little freaked out when they see him, like, catch a mouse for the first time.
I mean, it's freaky the first time you see it.
And that's one of the things, the longer they stay in the form, the more it kind of takes over them.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Huh. So the 5 friends are basically constantly turning into animals and of all sorts and using that to try to fight against these aliens.
Because there has to be a mystery to be solved. You can't, like, just having the powers wouldn't actually be that interesting.
Exactly.
You gotta have a reason.
Exactly. So the thing is, at the end of the books, they end sadly. I read an article called The Disturbing End of Animorphs. That's how it was.
I mean, there's a lot of different versions of disturbing that could be.
Okay, so near the very end, maybe like the second to last book, the main Animorph guy, Jake, he was kind of like the leader. They've basically recruited all these other kids into their side of this war. And so all of these kids, I don't remember exactly what it was, but whatever military strategy, he basically orders all of them to their death.
Oh.
Right. So in the next book, the war ends by like the very beginning of the book, the aftermath, and it's so depressing.
He's gone.
He ends up ordering his cousin, Rachel, who's like this pretty fun blonde girl, and she's been dating Jake in bird form. Dating Tobias in bird form. I don't know. I don't remember. But anyways, it's in part of his master plan, and she dies. And Tobias, like, never forgives him. Jake has, like, mad PTSD and can't live a normal life. And then that's it.
That's just how it ends?
Yeah.
War sucks, get a helmet.
It's...
Interesting choice.
So the article that I just mentioned, it says it's at the end of what had been a relatively breezy series about kids battling aliens that takes a sharp turn into major anti-war writing.
Somebody watched Starship Troopers and then wrote the end book in a series.
Yeah, I just remember how that ended and I was just like, this is tragic.
There are some endings of stories that just leave you salty for life. I'm looking at you. My name is Earl. I loved it so much. I loved it, and I know that it wasn't the fault of the folks that actually made it. They did beautiful work. It's just I can't even watch the last 3 episodes of the season because it's just I know it's coming.
My nieces love that show
for good reason.
Right, it's so good. But yeah, I hope you feel like you learned something about serialized books.
I absolutely did. That was fascinating.
I love books. I love books so much. I have like 73 books left on my summer reading list.
I got a very sweet gift from a very dear friend, and he was actually kind of worried about it, apparently. He told me after the fact. That was a book bag from the Strand bookstore in New York.
Cool.
And it is a John Waters quote that says, if you go home with someone and they don't have books, don't fuck them.
It's
And it's,
not saying it's bad life advice.
it's good advice.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a rating if you're feeling like it. We would love that.
Catch you next time.
Bye.